Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're doing something incredibly practical and, honestly, highly impactful. We're diving deep into a science-backed toolkit for crafting unforgettable explanations. Because whether you're leading a team, pitching a new product, or just trying to get a complex point across in a quick meeting, the ability to explain things clearly is arguably the absolute most valuable skill you can possess. It's literally the bridge between confusion and absolute clarity. Think about that for a second. We are bombarded with information all day long, but communication expert Lee LeFever poses this really fascinating concept. When an idea actually makes it into our long-term memory, it's a survivor. It hasn't just been heard, right? It's successfully run the mind's gauntlet, overcoming all sorts of distractions, complexities, and usually a total lack of context. So our goal today is to figure out exactly how to arm our ideas so they survive that journey. Okay, let's dive into this and look at our roadmap. We'll start with surviving the mind's gauntlet, then explore why context is a two-way street, break down the anatomy of great explanations, learn a practical 7-step process, and finally, master dynamic explanations. Section 1. Surviving the mind's gauntlet, the battle for long-term memory. To start off, we really have to reframe how we think about communication. It is not a passive transfer of data. It's an uphill battle for retention. And this brings us to a major trap. The illusion of the one-way street. It's super easy to assume that if we just say the words out loud, the audience is just going to automatically absorb them. But explanation is a two-way street. Your words are just raw data until the audience actively connects them with meaning in their own heads. You don't decide if the explanation works. They do. Section 2. Context is a two-way street, bridging the gap to understanding. So how do we actually get the audience to assign meaning to our raw data? Well, we do it by bridging the gap using context. Take this really relatable story from Lee LeFever about a woman named Olivia at the doctor's office. She's distracted, she's hearing tons of medical jargon, and she's basically forgetting almost everything. But one piece of advice survives the mind's gauntlet. Eat more fiber to reduce cholesterol. Why did that stick? Well, first, it earned her attention because it was framed as a threat to her health. Second, it tapped into her existing context. She already knew high cholesterol was bad for her heart. And third, the doctor provided the missing added context, explaining this simple logic that fiber physically removes bad cholesterol. By combining those 3 steps, the doctor made the information literally snap into place in Olivia's long-term memory. Section 3. Anatomy of Great Explanations. Deconstructing Clarity. So we know why explanations work psychologically, but how do we actively engineer them in the real world? For that, we turn to the framework developed by BBC journalist Roz Atkins. His philosophy boils down to 3 core phases: plan, package, and present. And this brilliantly illustrates our focus today, which is heavily on the packaging phase. Great explanations don't just dump facts on people. They package ideas to lower the cost of understanding. Basically, you do the hard work so the audience doesn't have to. Atkins identifies 10 attributes of a great explanation. We're not going to dissect every single one right now, but just look at words like simplicity, efficiency, precision, and no distractions. The overarching theme here is that less is more, provided the information you're sharing is highly valuable, of course. Short words in short sentences just completely remove the obstacles to comprehension. You want to ruthlessly hunt down anything that isn't absolutely essential to your core purpose. Now, this quote from Alan Little is a fantastic pattern interrupt because it hits so hard. If your writing hasn't been disciplined enough, your thinking hasn't been disciplined enough. You absolutely cannot dodge complexities and still hope to explain something well. To explain is to first deeply understand. If your sentences are rambling all over the place, it's a glaring signal that you haven't put in the rigorous, disciplined thought required to truly master the subject matter. Which leads perfectly into my absolute favorite anecdote about the attribute of efficiency. When engineers presented the very first iPod prototype to Steve Jobs, they insisted, absolutely insisted, it couldn't possibly be made any smaller. Jobs took the device and dropped it straight into an aquarium. As air bubbles floated up to the top, he pointed and said, "Those are air bubbles. That means there's space in there. Make it smaller." We must apply that exact same ruthless standard to our explanations. Cut the air bubbles. Cut the non-essential information, because every extra detail makes it harder for the essential details to survive. Section 4. The 7-step process. The blueprint for prepared communication. All right, let's move from theory into action. If you're preparing for a highly controlled environment, like a speech or a big presentation, you need a blueprint. Here is Atkins' practical 7-step process. You set up your purpose, you gather all your raw data, and then you distill it down. But step 4 is where the magic really happens, organizing. You take all those distilled facts and group them into logical strands or themes. You build this nice chronological or thematic narrative. Then you link them smoothly, tighten the phrasing, and practice the delivery. It's a rigorous process of taking a chaotic mountain of data and forming it into a sleek, aerodynamic story. So, the crucial point here is the number 15. During step 6, when you're tightening your language, apply this golden rule of thumb. Keep your sentences to 15 words or fewer. It forces you to be punchy. It forces you to place the subject right at the front of the sentence. It drastically maximizes the clarity of your message and gives your audience the much-needed breathing room to actually digest your points. Section 5, Mastering Dynamic Explanations, Navigating the Unscripted. But what happens when you don't have a script? Let's see how this plays out in real-world, unpredictable interactions. In a controlled explanation, you dictate the flow. A, then B, then C. But dynamic situations are fluid. Someone might ask you about point C right out of the gate. If you're entirely dependent on a linear script, you're going to completely freeze up. To survive dynamic environments, you have to pre-package your information into modular chunks so you can instantly jump around as needed. To do that, we use a specialized 5-piece formula for creating a dynamic strand. You take a distinct section of your subject and limit it to exactly 5 elements: a primary point, 3 supporting facts, and the overarching context. This creates a dense, highly memorable building block of information. It's short enough to deploy in a quick conversation, but packed with enough essential detail to prove your credibility at a moment's notice. Once you build these chunks, you actually have to memorize them. And actually, scratch that. We don't mean rote, robotic, word-for-word memorization. You want to use spatial and narrative techniques to store about 10 to 20 of these chunks in your brain. You can link them into a bizarre story, attach them to landmarks on your drive to the supermarket using the journey method, or place them in rooms of your childhood home with a memory palace. When you do this, retrieving the data doesn't feel like reciting a rigid script. It just feels like a natural, improvised conversation. Now, what's really interesting is this tennis analogy, inspired by the legend Roger Federer. When you're taking questions, you don't control the serve. You can't dictate what someone is going to ask you or what tone they're going to use, but through deep preparation, chunking, and practicing your delivery, you absolutely control the return. You can use simple bridging phrases to naturally pivot from their unexpected question directly to one of your memorized strands. And really, that is the whole shebang. That's the true art and science of explanation. It's not just about being smart. It is about being utterly disciplined in how you package what you know so that others can easily understand it. So my challenge to you, the focused learner, is this. Take this toolkit, hunt down the non-essential distractions, build your dynamic strands, and turn in next complex communication into an unforgettable survivor. So what complex idea will you simplify today?